Welcome to Hard Talk with me, Zainab Badawi, in New York. My guest in this rare interview is the Foreign Minister of Iran, Javad Zarif, who's on a visit here. Tensions between the United States and Iran have been at a historic high. President Trump said he was 10 minutes away from war with Tehran following recent tensions in the Persian Gulf. And what about the Europeans? Can they save the historic nuclear deal after President Trump unilaterally withdrew from it? Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, welcome to Hard Talk. The British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt says that there is a small but closing window to save the nuclear deal agreed in 2015 between Iran and the world powers. Is he right?
I think he is right, but it requires committed determination on all sides to save this deal. Iran has implemented its part of the deal, and it is necessary for the rest of the world, particularly for the three Europeans, to also take action. They made very nice statements, but statements do not provide economic benefits for Iranians.
Let me just tell you what leaked documents have told us about at least the UK position about the US withdrawing from the deal last year. Sir Kim Darroch, who has just stepped down as British ambassador to Washington, said that Trump's got an incoherent and chaotic policy on Iran, and that the US is set upon an act of diplomatic vandalism, seemingly for ideological and personality reasons, because it was President Obama's deal. To what extent have these leaks affected the dynamics in all of this? Has it made Iran feel encouraged to try to exploit differences between the US and Europe?
Well, we believe that this deal is in the interest of the international community, including the United States. It doesn't matter whether the previous administration in the United States negotiated this deal. This is a deal that was negotiated by the United States because, as you know, in the international community, you don't recognize this or the other government. You recognize a country and the government of that country. And we did negotiate this with the government of the United States, and the government of the United States should abide by the commitments. There wasn't a revolution in the US last I checked. So I believe that it is for President Trump the best deal possible. I believe President Trump is being advised by people who are not interested in promoting peace, but interested in advancing an agenda that they've had.
Just sticking with the European point, do you feel emboldened now to try to exploit the differences between Europe and the US? I mean, the Europeans have said consistently it was a matter of huge regret that the United States withdrew unilaterally from the nuclear deal.
I believe it's important to make that statement, but at the same time, it's important to basically invest in what Europeans believe is a security document for them and is a security agreement for them. You cannot make any gains without basically making the necessary investment, and I think that is what's lacking. We have invested in the nuclear deal. More than talking, we have done things on the ground. The Europeans are not prepared to do things on the ground. They're willing to make
like
statements,
what?
Like purchasing our oil.
Foreign Minister, with the US sanctions on Iran, the Europeans cannot buy American oil.
Why not?
Because it's going to affect their companies.
If the Europeans, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Russians, try all of them to not allow the United States to bully them into abiding by its decisions, would the United States be able to destroy global economy and put sanctions on all of them? Let's take it, Shell, Total, Sinopec, all of them at the same time. Disregard this demand by the United States, which is
But
illegal, unlawful.
it's not going to happen. I mean, Natalie Tocci, who's advisor to Federica Mogherini, the European Union foreign policy chief, says the deal could be saved if there was US compliance, but this is not a likely proposition. So the Europeans' position is to try to strengthen what they call INSTEX, which is this framework through which the sanctions could to some extent be circumvented, especially allowing Iran to receive humanitarian aid, medicines and so on, which are exempt under the US sanctions. Do you have any faith that this would work? Do you have any faith in it?
You want to accept US predominance in global economy, even to your own detriment?
Well, I'm just telling you what the Europeans say.
Unfortunately, this is what they're saying, and I do not think this way they can resolve this crisis or any crisis. The Europeans and the rest of the global community are strong enough to withstand this. There is no need to try to circumvent it. But if they want to circumvent it through INSTEX, we have to see whether there is any actual benefit for the Iranian people. You see, the people are dying from cancer. People are dying, kids are dying from EB. People are dying from MS, just because there are a very limited area of pharmaceuticals that we cannot produce in Iran, and the United States. The United States says that they are exempt from sanctions.
They are exempt,
but financial transactions in order to purchase them are not exempt. Of course, the Americans say they are exempt, but they're not exempt.
All right, so you've given the Europeans 60 days again until early September to try to come up with some kind of way out of this to mitigate this impact of sanctions on the Iranians.
We haven't given them any ultimatums. What we did was, for an entire year, they asked us for a few weeks. We gave them about 60 weeks. And then we started, based on the agreement, not outside the agreement. The United States, as you know, walked out of the agreement. But we used a mechanism within the agreement in order to show them that they need to come back to the agreement and implement it. So we're not giving anybody any ultimatums. We are just implementing what we told them very transparently, that these will be the steps that we will take.
Under the nuclear deal, Iran is only allowed to enrich its uranium to 3.67. We now know that you are enriching uranium beyond that to around 4.5. So why do this? Because it doesn't help the Europeans make your case, does it, to the Americans?
We implemented the agreement fully. IAEA made 15 reports from the beginning, 5 of them after the US withdrawal, and all of them indicated that Iran was fulfilling its commitments fully. Unfortunately, the Europeans could not take advantage of these and just drag their feet. It won't happen again. You know, Iran is a country with an old civilization. For us, the dignity of our people is extremely important.
But why enrich the uranium, Foreign Minister? Because President Rouhani said on July the 7th, our enrichment level will no longer be 3.67. We will increase beyond this to as much as we want, as much as is necessary, and as much as we need. And you know, the Europeans say no partial compliance is acceptable.
Well, the Europeans cannot say partial or full compliance, whether it's acceptable or not. It's the deal itself. Paragraph 36 of the deal says that Iran or the other side, if we are not satisfied with the implementation of the deal by the other side, we can take some measures within the deal. That is in order to keep the deal surviving, to keep it from going totally dead.
So will you continue to enrich levels of uranium?
This deal was written based on total mistrust. Neither side trusted the other side. That is why we put everything in black and white. Very clearly stated that if we don't comply, what they can take, if we are the initial breakers of the deal, they can take measures. If they are the initial breakers of the deal, they can also take measures.
So you've got to allay fears, haven't you, Foreign Minister? The Iranians, according to the British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, he has said this week that Iran is a year away from developing a nuclear bomb.
If Iran wanted to build a bomb, we would have built a bomb a long time ago. We could have built the bomb a long time ago. We do not want to build a bomb because we believe that a nuclear bomb will not augment our security. But if the Europeans are serious about a nuclear weapons-free Middle East, there is somewhere else that they need to be looking, and that's Israel, where they have at least 200 nuclear warheads.
President Trump said quite recently that he was 10 minutes away from war with Iran over the shooting down of the unmanned US drone over what America says was international waters, and the French President Emmanuel Macron agrees with that. You say no, it was over Iranian waters and so on. But do you accept that the US doesn't want war?
I accept that President Trump doesn't want war, but I know that there are people in his administration who are crazy for war, who thirst for war.
John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, who...
I don't think I need to mention him. President Trump himself has mentioned it.
How do you assess the possibility, the likelihood of some kind of military engagement between Iran and America?
You see, it's called Persian Gulf for a reason. It's next to our coast. We have almost 1,500 miles of coast with Persian Gulf. It's not the Gulf of Mexico. We're there, we're protecting our territorial waters. And if this drone had been shot in international waters, over international airspace, why did we got to pick up the pieces?
All right, so, well, as I told you, the Americans and supported by, as I said, President Macron say it happened over international waters.
Was President Macron around?
Well, they had their intelligence.
That's what we told him.
All right.
Were you there?
But
we are there.
But there have been tensions in the Gulf. I mean, we've seen the recent tensions about, the Norwegian and the Japanese registered oil tankers, which you have said Iran had nothing to do with, the attacks on those tankers. But the suspicion is by the United States and the United Kingdom and others that Iran was involved. And we've also seen the recent tensions between Britain and Iran over the seizure of Grace 1, your vessel. What do you think the possibility of you stumbling into an accidental war in the Gulf are?
Well, again, it's a Persian Gulf because it's next to our borders. It's a body of water that Iran has protected. Iran has maintained the security and freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz for millennia, and we will continue to do that. We're the major power in that region. Those who have come to our region have not, those who have come to Persian Gulf, brought their naval vessels to Persian Gulf, are not helping secure these body of waters.
What do you think is the possibility or the likelihood of stumbling into some conflict?
Of course there is a possibility of accident, but we cannot leave our own neighborhood. Those who have come from outside have to decide why are they in that neighborhood and whether their presence in that neighborhood is helping stability and security in that neighborhood.
How high do you think the possibility of an accidental war?
I mean, we just, as President Trump has said, we were 10 minutes away from war, because had they taken measures against Iran, President Trump had been told that Iran would be taking measures in self-defense.
What kind of measures would you have taken?
Well, I'm not a military man, so I leave that to the military.
Well, we've heard statements from Iranian authorities that there would be attacks on allies such as Saudi Arabia and Dubai if there were any military action against Iran.
You see, we don't take blind action. Anybody who's helping the United States in its war against Iran, the United States is right now engaged in economic war against Iran. There are countries that are providing the United States with logistical support, with reconnaissance. That means that they are participating in the war. So we're not...
So that could happen. You could target allies in the Gulf.
If there is a war...
US allies.
If there is a war, then I do not think anybody will be safe in our region. But let us all try to avoid one. We don't need a war. We've gone through 8 years of war, a war that was imposed on us with the help of everybody.
But why not de-escalate the situation? For example, the Grace 1, which has been seized by British naval authorities. You've had a conversation with the British Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, and he said, look, this vessel could be freed if it's not bound for Syria. It's that kind of action which the West find provocative.
It's piracy, plain and simple.
But there are EU sanctions against selling oil to Syria.
there are EU sanctions against buying Syrian oils, not against selling Syria oil. One.
Yes,
second,
going through EU. There are EU sanctions against selling oil to Syria for
EU
European countries.
From European countries. Iran is not a European country.
But you were going near Gibraltar, which
Iran
is part
not
of the EU.
No. That's part of international shipping lanes. We were going through that. But we announced from the very beginning that this ship was not destined to Syria.
Where was it going
And
then?
I told Jeremy, I'm not supposed to tell, I'm not obliged to tell anybody. This is international freedom of navigation.
So there was oil on the tanker, obviously.
Iranian oil.
Iranian oil.
The tanker is not Iranian.
You won't say where it's going.
The tanker is not Iranian. It was carrying Iranian oil, which we had sold. And it was going to a place in Mediterranean other than Syria. We made it clear. You know that we are under sanctions from the United States. Their objective is to bring our oil sales to zero. That is why we will do whatever we can to avoid the United States knowing what we are doing. One more thing.
Was it oil going to Turkey, perhaps?
One more thing. The United Kingdom, by taking our ship, by confiscating our ship, is helping the United States imposing its illegal oil sanctions against Iran. It's nothing about EU sanctions against Syria, it's about Iran. That is why John Bolton thanked Great Britain for giving them the best 4th of July presents possible.
So you think Britain is doing America's bidding?
If the UK wants to serve US interests, they should not be talking about trying to preserve JCP oil.
All right, but the fact of the matter is, as I said, is that your issue over the nuclear deal is with the United States. Why not renegotiate? You have said, President Rouhani said just a few days ago that if the sanctions are lifted, then if you avert the sanctions, then Iran will return to the negotiating table, is what he said.
We did not leave the negotiation table. It was the United States that left the negotiation table.
Okay, he said avert your sanctions and return to the negotiating table to America.
Have to return to the negotiating table.
But does that mean you will renegotiate?
We will not renegotiate. We will not renegotiate.
But why not?
You see, this deal was the subject of 12 years of negotiations, 2 years of which were intense negotiations. I spent days, months negotiating this. We spent a lot of time with the United States negotiating this deal. It's about give and take. Any deal, my friend.
But you've got to break the deadlock, Foreign Minister.
Yeah, but if you allow a bully to bully you into accepting one thing, you'll encourage him to bully you into accepting other things. We negotiated this deal. We did what we were supposed to do. The US did not do what it's supposed to do.
Sure, you've made that point.
The United States is working on the policy line that what's mine is mine, what's yours is negotiable.
All right.
Iran,
but how to
Iran
break
will
the
not
deadlock,
do it.
though? Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, has set out some clear issues that he wants addressed as part of any, in the Americans' view, future nuclear deal. The way Iran, they say, and British and the Europeans support them, destabilizing influence in the region through your support for Hezbollah in Lebanon to the tune, he says, of $700 million a year. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, the Bahrainis complain about your support for anti-government movements there. I could go on. And you say, look, we're not doing any of this, but the Americans believe this. How can you go back to the table, discuss these things, say, look, you're accusing us unfairly, but go back to the table and reopen these issues with them?
You see, the problem is they left the table. And they're the ones who are supposed to come back to the table by starting to basically fulfill their own obligations. But let's just address the questions that you just raised. Did we support Saddam Hussein when he attacked Iran? Did we support ISIS? I mean, President Trump himself said Iran is fighting ISIS. Are we bombing the Yemenis? Did we invade Yemen? Was it Iran that basically arrested the Prime Minister of Lebanon and kept him in prison
but where does this
for 3
take
weeks?
you, Foreign Minister?
If the United States is looking for those responsible for malign behavior in the region, the United States needs to look at its own allies. Are we even
Talk to them about this. Talk to them about this and say, look, we will reopen the negotiations with a new nuclear deal and meet them and talk about this.
President Trump has said that I am not engaged in military war against Iran, I'm engaged in economic war against Iran. What does it mean to be engaged in economic war? Economic war targets civilians. Military war targets military personnel. Civilians are sometimes collateral damage. But an economic war targets civilians. The United States Secretary Pompeo has said that we want the Iranian people to change their government. So putting these two together, that means that the United States is terrorizing Iranian people in order to achieve political objectives. That's the classical definition of terrorism.
The Americans have said consistently, Mike Pompeo, is their goal is not regime change. He says, we want to change Iran's behavior so it behaves like a normal country.
Mike Pompeo,
that's what he has said.
Iran is a normal country. The country that is not normal is the United States. Right. Which normal country violates every international agreement? INF, NAFTA, the Paris Climate Convention, UNESCO, Human Rights Council. Is that what you call normal?
Let me put to you, though, you've said your country is suffering from the sanctions. When you give organizations like Hezbollah hundreds of millions of dollars a year,
who said we give them hundreds of millions?
Well, that's what Mike Pompeo said.
Mike Pompeo,
keep the money for your people.
Mike Pompeo may like to make statements. You see, Mike Pompeo's allies in our region, Saudi Arabia, spend $67 billion a year on military equipment. They are bombing the Yemenis. Are we doing that? We only spent $16 billion last year on entire military budget.
All right, then there's the case of the British Iranian woman, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who has been in prison for 3 years in Iran. You have said that you're sorry that she's in prison, separated from her daughter, and that you have talked about in the past of a possible prisoner swap between the United States, which is keeping some Iranian prisoners, as well as a woman in Australia. You've said that Nazanin has gone through due process of law in Iran and so on. But can I ask you this? Could she be released soon on compassionate grounds?
Well, you see, that's not a decision for me to take, but that is an ideal situation for which I have tried and I will continue to try. But let's put
compassionate grounds to get her released soon.
But let's put it this way. She went through the legal process. We have people in Europe who are being extradited to the United States for violating the sanctions that Europe does not recognize. Does not recognize.
I was just asking you about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's case because her health is suffering and her mental health is also a great concern
you see,
to her family.
I'm not
she
happy
went on
to see a single individual in prison, and I'll do my best to address that to the maximum of my capacity and my capability. But as foreign minister, I am responsible for the conduct of foreign affairs of the country, and she's an Iranian citizen.
Finally and briefly, what would it take to find a way out of this impasse? Some kind of face-saving deal for both you in Iran and the Americans to give some impetus and progress to the deadlock we have now?
Well, we don't need to have a deadlock. We do not want to embarrass anybody. We believe all we want is what we negotiated and should implement it, and then we can go even further. I believe our region has enough real problems. We don't want imaginary problems.
Could you renegotiate the deal from scratch with the Americans?
Nobody can.
If you had a waiver to the sanctions.
Let me tell you.
If you had a waiver to the sanctions.
Let me tell you. I negotiated this deal. I know that it's impossible to get a better deal. I know that anybody who was involved, anybody who was in the room will tell you that it is impossible to get a better deal.
Even if you could sell some oil to China and India, there was a waiver that allowed you to do that under the US sanctions. Could that be a step forward?
We will continue to sell our oil, but we will not sell our dignity.
Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.
Good to be with you.